Welcome back to Unknown Fantasy Origins, the show where we explore the backstories behind concepts seen in TV, film, and gaming. Viewer discretion is advised. Stories from the real world are more disturbing than they appear on TV. In the previous episode of UFO, I talked about the real-life stories portrayed on the popular TV show American Horror Story Season 1. For this episode, we're going to take a look at Season 2, Asylum. One of the most talked about plot lines was that of Evan Peters' character, Kit Walker. Kit was accused of killing several women, including his wife. Now, he had kept his interracial marriage quiet, but things started to look suspicious when his wife suddenly went missing. What irked many people was the introduction of aliens, creatures that would come abduct and return characters throughout the season. Unknown to the audience, the show's creator was adamant about keeping aliens in the plotline. Why? Because most of the components about Kit Walker and his wife were taken from the real-life story of Betty and Barney Hill, an interracial couple that was abducted by aliens in 1961. The story was the first widely publicized alien abduction case, becoming a book and even a TV movie, and not to mention countless references in anything that was UFO related. So let's take a look at that fateful night, September 19th, 1961. Barney Hill worked for the U.S. Postal Service and Betty Hill was a social worker. Their interracial marriage was uncommon in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, let alone the United States. Around 10:30 p.m. on the 19th, the Hills were returning from their vacation to Niagara Falls and Montreal. Betty soon saw what looked like a falling star falling up. They pulled over to let the dog out and to get a closer look. Through binoculars, Betty saw what looked like a flying saucer, but Barney kept insisting that it was just a plane. Suddenly, the craft changed direction towards them, and they frantically drove away. They watched as this ship followed in pursuit, bouncing and spinning around the mountain. The craft soon came down and stopped just in front of their car. Barney grabbed his pistol and approached the craft. These beings, somehow not human, could be seen wandering around inside. Afraid, Barney ran back to the car screaming, "They're going to capture us!" As he was getting in the car, the craft moved over top their car and began to follow them as they tried to escape. The car soon began to vibrate and make these beeping noises that completely surrounded them. In all the chaos, the Hills went into this altered state of consciousness. A different kind of beeping broke them from their haze, and this is where they realized they were 35 miles south of where they were, and they couldn't remember how they got there. By dawn, they finally made it home. This is where they couldn't explain how they were feeling. Betty, for instance, was insistent that the luggage needed to be by the back door and not in its usual place. Their watches were completely broken and would never work again. The strap on their binoculars was completely ripped. Barney's shoes were scratched. Barney even felt that he needed to check his genitals, but saw nothing was wrong. So they tried to take a long shower to wash off this feeling that they had. And that was when it dawned on them to draw what they could remember. And in these drawings, they saw that they were extremely similar to one another's. They were trying to piece together their timelines and finding it very difficult. After falling asleep, Betty decided to put her clothes away. It was then that she noticed her dress was completely torn and had this pinkish powder on it. Unfortunately, the powder blew away when she hung it on the clothesline, but she decided to keep the dress in her closet just in case. It came in handy when 5 different laboratories wanted to test it for evidence of an alien abduction. Betty reported what happened to the Pease Air Force Base. After interviewing them, they suspected that they had misidentified Jupiter. Betty, who was unconvinced, went to the library and checked out a book about UFOs. She actually wrote the author a letter. Her letter was passed on to Walter Webb, who was an astronomer and a NICAP member. In October, Webb conducted a 6-hour interview about the event. Although Barney couldn't recall certain portions, he believed that the couple was telling the truth. 10 days after the encounter, Betty started to have these visions. For 5 nights straight, she had vivid dreams. She decided to write them down in detail, talking about the roadblock that they had, being led into the forest, and these men in blue uniforms decided to separate them to examine them. They looked at her eyes, her ears, her mouth, her teeth, her throat, her hands. They even took a chunk of her hair, and even fingernail trimmings. After looking at her legs and her feet, they took a scraping of her skin and stuck a needle into her navel. The pain, though excruciating, disappeared with a wave of a hand. She was shown a map of where these creatures had come from, and they in turn insisted that she would never remember what had happened. Once they were taken to the car, they waited until the craft had departed before they drove away home. In an interview with NICAP, they figured out that the Hills were missing about 3 hours of their time. So, the NICAP suggested hypnosis. Barney was unsure but thought it might help Betty move on from her insistence over her vivid dreams. The couple spent several trips trying to relocate their point of capture. They eventually did find it, and it's actually marked with a historical marker. The Hills, through their church, were referred to Benjamin Simon in Boston. Simon could tell that the Hills truly believed that the UFO event happened and wanted to uncover some of the details of what they had seen. Although they had several sessions, Simon hypnotized them separately. Barney was found to be quite emotional, talking about how he had his eyes shut throughout the whole abduction and the examination. While he was escaping in the car, he pulled off into the forest where it would soon stall on him. These men appeared and said not to be afraid and to shut his eyes. He was taken onto the craft, separated from his wife, and put on a table. With his eyes shut, they put this cup device on his genitals and retrieved sperm without an orgasm. They scraped his skin and looked into his ears and his mouth. A thin tube went into his anus and was quickly removed, while another was slowly counting his vertebrae in his spine. The beings actually spoke telepathically in a language that they could understand. Afterwards, he was taken back to his car, and he saw the craft leave. Betty's memories were similar to her dreams, except for a few things like the capture and the release. The craft looked a little different, and so did the men. The sequence was a little out of order, but comparing Barney's and Betty's accounts, they were consistent. After several sessions, Betty was actually able to draw the star map that she had seen. She claimed that these were the trade routes that these visitors traveled upon. So, Simon concluded that Barney's memories came from the recollection of Betty's vivid dreams. Now, not everything was explained, but this was the most plausible reason. Barney refused to believe that this was the reason, but the Hills both did agree that the hypnosis had helped their anxiety, and Simon later published an article about their case. While the Hills did not seek publicity at all, they soon found it. The Boston Traveler published an article about the Hills, the alien abduction, Simon's hypnosis, and even details from confidential interviews that they had participated in. And that's when the story went international. John Fuller, with full permission from the Hills, actually wrote a story based on their experiences called The Interrupted Journey, actually including the star map drawing that Betty had drawn. And the story was widely successful. Unfortunately, Barney later died in 1969 from a cerebral hemorrhage, while Betty died in 2004 of cancer. This story has been studied over and over. Now, psychiatrists believe that these are mere hallucinations caused by the interracial issues of this time period, even though there was no evidence of there being any problems at all. A blogger stated that the hypnosis took place 2 years after the event, so the Hills had plenty of time to corroborate their story. Another article said that Barney's account was extremely similar to an episode of The Outer Limits called Bolero's Shield that aired 2 weeks before the event happened. Other people believe that the accounts are very similar to the film Invaders from Mars, and some people actually believe it's as simple as sleep deprivation, seeing things while you're really tired on your way home from vacation. While aliens did seem out of place for American Horror Story Season 2, it was in fact a gentle nod towards Betty and Barney Hill, who they used for inspiration. So, do you believe that Betty and Barney Hill were actually abducted by aliens? Do you trust the accounts they gave under hypnosis? Or is there just a reasonable explanation for everything? Whether you believe or not is up to you. Whether you learned something today is up to me. Please stay tuned for the next episode of Unknown Fantasy Origins. My name is Christy A. Bell, and this is American Horror Story Season 2. Just remember, if you look in the face of evil, evil's gonna look right back at you.